Good evening, LBE community. Good evening, Flagstaff, Arizona. Good evening to these United States. Good evening to everyone anywhere who is tuning into this and joining us for this conversation on all things the 2024 election, the wildness that is taking place in our political landscapes right now, the exciting shift in the Democratic Party nomination, and some of the implications that has for our community and all communities as we get ready to enter this wild election season. I am excited to be joined for this kitchen table conversation by two repeat LBE guests, Dr. Tria Allen and Dr. Ramona Curtis. We are very proud and happy to be able to introduce Dr. Curtis as Dr. Curtis tonight. She has officially finalized her degree and is officially, we've been calling her doctor for many years now, but it is now official. So we are wonderful to and overjoyed to be able to share that tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to have you each just introduce yourselves and let's get this conversation kicked off right. Since it's been called into question, let's start with who you are and what is your Black job? So Dr. Allen, we'll start with you.
Hey, good people. My name is Dr. Tria Allen. I am at the University of Arizona and Pima Community College. My Black job is the Director of Inclusion, not Director, Coordinator of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Focused Faculty Support. What that basically means is I make good teachers even better teachers, and I make great classes or help work with faculty to make their classes great, including looking at structure and curriculum. And at PMI, I teach in African American Studies, psychology, and student success. That's my Black job.
Well, I am delighted to be here tonight. Dr. Ramona Curtis, it does feel good to say that to you. My Black job, after retiring from a 10-year criminal justice degree and a 20-year career at Baylor University, I am now the Director for Workforce at Tulsa Community College. And that is my Black job. I'm not sure if that is what our former President Trump meant when he said Black job. I'm a Black person and that is my job. So I am really looking forward to tonight and engaging in this landscape today. And I always love to be here on this Live Black experience because that's what it is. And it's even getting more real with this DEI hire who's going to be our next president. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. I think that's probably a perfect place to start is with that question of what is a Black job? What did the former president mean when he brought that up? And why is that such an important conversation for us to have about, the significance of a statement like that and what it means for not only what he may have meant or what he meant when he said that, but also the implications for people who accept that statement and accept that there is some sort of differentiation between what we've often now heard him refer to as Black jobs, Hispanic jobs, and then union jobs. So there's some sort of difference that's being set there, and I'm curious to hear what you all think about that distinction.
Can I just offer some historical context really quickly about what this comment made me think of? So in about the 60s, I want to say it was either 66 or 63, there's this article that comes out about the model minority. And the idea was, in this article, they were comparing Chinese, at the time, it was specifically Chinese, but broader strokes could say Asian communities to Black communities. And the purpose of it was for two things. One, to kind of like put a punch in the Black Power movement at the time, but also to set up this like hierarchy. Like there's always been a racial caste system in the United States. But the idea behind this article really ends up impacting both of those communities, right? So now we have Asian communities being held as the model minority. They come here, they get their jobs done, they accept lower quality things, and their kids still perform in school. Whereas Black people who had built this country were rebel rousers at the time, because they were allowing, the good folks of the North to come and help them to demand rights, whether those rights were building unions in the South, especially as it related to sharecropping, or demanding of civil rights. So when you make this comment like, hey, they're coming over here and stealing Black jobs, I think that before we can even get into like, well, what's the definition or what's the delineation between those jobs, that this rhetoric has been seen before when we compare two communities to each other. And the idea behind that is to weaken one community. So when former President Trump was in before, remember he was making comments about the Mexicans are coming and they are creating violent, doing heinous things. They're taking jobs. They're doing, these heinous crimes and sexual assault. That was the rhetoric that he chose to use, which ironically, I believe at this point he has been convicted of all of those things in a U.S. based court. And of course, I'm being facetious right now. But when we say things like Black jobs, union jobs, and these other jobs, it's also very interesting to me how he's delineating what those mean as well. I believe like Alvarado was talking about when Trump was saying that, Alvarado was saying that he took Black jobs, not Alvarado, I'm sorry, that they were talking about agricultural positions and jobs. And this is also significant because Black people were stolen from West and East Africa to come here and create a land and to be able to work the land. They were specifically sought out for their expertise. But we know now that the majority of agricultural jobs, especially when we think about migrant workers who are coming over to work in the agricultural fields, those jobs are primarily held by individuals who are coming here as migrant workers. And then if we go a step further and we think about unions, how Black and brown people were not allowed in unions when unions first got started. So it's interesting that he's still like hitting on these things, but doesn't really understand the rhetoric behind what those things actually mean and the history of what Black jobs were, which were primarily blue collar labor and labor intensive for low wages, or agricultural jobs, which, primarily, especially in the Southwest, a lot of those are held by migrant workers from whatever nations they come from, but our proximation to the border, often they are Mexican. Um, and then union jobs, which we were not allowed in unions. I mean, just like even as close as Texas, the concerted effort to keep unions out of agricultural work range from anywhere from breaking up, meetings towards this and actual physical violence. So when you say they're coming over here taking Black jobs, well, what jobs would those be? Because the comment also suggests that Black people are relegated to one form of employment. And like I said, my Black job is to help teachers become better teachers. So what Black job are we talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I just to piggyback on what you're saying, we've been here before, and I think it was the Bush administration when having those conversations about those coming into Texas from Mexico, taking jobs from African Americans. And I think you're right as what was possibly meant or allegedly meant by a Black job. I think when I think when they, the whole idea of when they see us. So when they see us, what do they see? And if you're running for public office, you need to have a diverse background and see the different economic levels of all races to be able to see that you can't categorize one group of people to one type of job or one type of class of job, so to speak. Uh, Most of Americans believe that undocumented immigrants mostly fill jobs, but they say these are jobs Americans don't want. Not that Black people don't want. These are jobs Americans don't want. And for the reasons that Dr. Allen was talking, they're low wage, high demand, low wage jobs. And so many times in these positions, people are taken advantage of because you're getting folks at a desperate state and filling those. And so, but when you can pit people against each other, but it's even though it didn't work in this case, it ended up being punchlines or memes all over social media. But when you try to pit people against each other for your own good, that's toxic. That's not leadership. But when you try to understand what employment looks like in America and what those issues are surrounding unemployment or employment period, our workers' wages and what a living wage, a life sustaining wage is, then that's where your focus needs to be. But to categorize a race of people that to pit, I guess, what you would call two races against each other, immigrants versus African Americans. And you're talking about those blue collar, low, very low wage, migrant worker type jobs. It was for your own gain and not to tell Black people that we've done so much for you. And too bad these people are coming over and stealing these jobs we've created for you.
That's a really interesting point, especially what you both have honed in on in terms of pitting people against each other. Because I just had a conversation about this topic with another group of Black women, and we started with answering that question of what is your Black job, but then also just the challenges that we face in our own professional lives, of uh, that identity of Blackness in the workplace and all of that. And I found myself saying at one point in the conversation that the reason that that sort of statement is troubling is because it suggests that my Black job is in kind of that lower echelon, if you will, of job placement. And I said at one point that there's not an immigrant or a migrant who's coming in and taking my Black job that I needed, advanced degree or advanced work experience and those things for. And after thinking about that statement, even for myself for a minute, my thing was that is kind of making an assumption of the immigrant and the migrant community as well, is it not? Creating that urge in myself or others who are saying, no, nobody's coming and taking my job because I have expertise, because I have this, and the assumption that that makes that someone coming as a migrant or a newcomer to this country doesn't. And just thinking, do we know how many doctors, how many attorneys, how many high level professionals are migrating for those better experiences for themselves or their families and those things? Why would the assumption be that they would not be qualified for a higher position? So it's just, those sorts of challenges of the mindset that we get into when we feed into that sort of rhetoric, I think is the ultimate point there. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Is there danger in, as much as we've, poked fun at the statement, and it continues to be a meme, and it continues to be a wonderful place of bolstering and sharing out what our Black jobs are, do we run the risk of falling into those same sort of rhetorical or caste system ideologies by playing into that rhetoric?
I
Go ahead,
think
Dr.
illusion is there. I think there, well, it's not there. It's trying to be created. I'll say that. The illusion is trying to be uh, created to say they're taking something from you. I love this quote by Lyndon Johnson that said, if you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. He'll give, he said, hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pocket for you. That's not going to work in the Black community. It might work in other communities, but it's not working in the Black community. So for me, there was a uniting of Black and brown around that Black job and that Hispanic job, but it normalizes whiteness, if I can say this. It normalizes whiteness, like Lyndon Johnson was saying. If you can convince someone that they are taking something from you, then they don't know what you're actually doing. So, but you can't pick our pocket like that. You can't pick our pocket and tell them they're taking our jobs. You can't pick our pocket like that, like you're doing with certain groups of people. It didn't work. And that's the way it went over. It went over very bad, because we're on to the game. Because when you have, I think that this particular person in this situation is taking our resilience for granted, but don't understand the resilience of African Americans. Those low wage jobs, high demand, but who are they high demand for? Who are they high demand for? They're high demand for a more capitalist class to take advantage of those who are in desperate situations and need jobs. Instead of making a livable wage, instead of letting the workforce demands drive our wages, then you make up stuff about someone coming over here and taking those jobs. Like you said, the jobs at hotels, maids, laundry, those type jobs. Are those Black jobs? Are those jobs that need people qualified to fill them? What are those? Are those Black jobs? So when you say those are Black jobs, what are you saying? That's our place? That's our only place? Instead of opening doors to close education gaps, opening doors to close economic gaps, opening doors to close home ownership gaps. Because you can't do that with these jobs that you're calling Black jobs, because we didn't drink the Kool-Aid. You can't pick our pockets. You may have picked some pockets on that side. You may have picked some MAGA pockets. I'll go ahead and say that. But you can't pick Black people's pockets. You can't pick Hispanic folks' pockets. You can't pick immigrant pockets. So that's the way I feel like that statement was meant to wage a war against the Black and brown community, and to say, I would be doing this for you if it wasn't for the need to close the borders. You would have jobs. Your communities would be better if you let me build this wall. But we know that is not the truth. Those jobs have been here forever and a day. Can't pick our pockets.
So I guess the only thing that I would add on to this is, Khara, the same way that you have this kind of like awakening of where you check yourself, that is the perniciousness of white supremacy. And so I say white supremacy to mean power structures that like provide us with all the isms, that there's only one universalized way of doing it, that the pie is not big enough for all of us to have a slice, that there are limited resources. But in a capitalistic society, you have folks fighting each other over resources that if we would like adequately and responsibly share, then we would not have to be talking about minimum wage gaps and housing gaps and how home ownership as well, those gaps as well. We also know that we can resolve a lot of our issues with very simplistic and intentional funding. I think I read something that we could ameliorate all homelessness in the United States, all of it, with $20 billion. And we will consistently say we do not have that, but then I'll turn around and watch us provide a country that must not be named millions and billions of dollars in support in the detriment to another country. That's all I'll say about that, right? And so I think that even when we're having these conversations, it's also important for us to check ourselves, because Dr. Curtis was like in my brain. I was like, Johnson said something about this, that we can get lumped into thinking like, well, I may be on the lowest caste in this country, but at least I'm not this, whatever this is. So fill in the blank, whether it's a migrant worker, whether it's an immigrant worker, whether it is somebody with LGBT, a trans person, whether it's LGBTQ community, where it's women, you fill in whatever the category is. And it's that at least I'm not thinking that allows rhetoric like this to divide. But as Dr. Curtis has said, this is not new to us at all. I think Nixon tried to do the same thing. Well, if you elect me for office, I can't do anything for, I think the quote was, I can't do anything for colored folks unless I'm elected to office. And my question is, what were you doing for us before you got into office, right? So this rhetoric of trying to divide communities towards the end of what will benefit me, I'm like, come on, stop doing that. But also, I think it's very important for us to check ourselves, because we too can uphold white supremacy. Um, Now, does it happen that way? Did we see some of the most comedic outpouring and collaborations, like via memes and everything else, and entertainment? Absolutely. But imagine if we took that a step further and we brought back what Chairman Fred Hampton had in the Rainbow Coalitions, right? Like, imagine if our communities united, because it's actually not the division that they're afraid of. The division is the answer. It's actually unification of marginalized groups that they are afraid of. And so the more I can divide, the more that I can get into the zeitgeist and the psyche, all the other things that the media, the more I can put that out there, then the possibility of somebody picking it up who's having a hard day or who just got unemployed, grabbing onto that rhetoric and going, yeah, that's the reason why I was unemployed. When it's like, no, you weren't unemployed because migrant workers are coming over here or Black people have jobs. You were unemployed because the coal industry as a whole is antiquated. So it's not someone taking your jobs, it's more efficient technology that's happening. And so I want to also just like point that out, just the brilliance of you checking yourself and going, wait, what do I mean by that? Because yeah, we have migrant workers migrants and immigrants who have come to this country who are doctors and lawyers who cannot practice within the confines of the United States, who are driving cabs. And what we are calling blue collar or Black jobs or whatever was meant by that, I watch these communities unify, and we'll work whatever job we can find to make sure that our families can be taken care of, even if it means that we sacrifice the luxury of individualism.
And I think I love what you're saying. I think even when in America, when we look at that, when we see those immigrants come over and do those things, it makes politicians on one side think, why can't Blacks do that? I'm just going to be honest here. Why can't African Americans do that? But the problem with that is you are seeing representation, but not awareness. So you're not seeing how we are not monolithic. You're not seeing that Black jobs are doctors, Black jobs are lawyers, not to the degree, because we still have racism in this country. We still, and I'm sorry, it may be covert, but we still have those systems that are there. We have, what is the book, Racism Without the Racist, where there are systems in place that still continue to see those gaps in education, gaps in home ownership, gaps in high demand, high wage jobs. We begin to see those issues because we still have not dealt with the system, those pieces that create barriers for, and I'm going to say it, for African Americans to get ahead in America. We still haven't, I'll say we still haven't talked to the community, worked with the community. We go and we'll grab someone, that one person will be that voice for the whole culture. That's not what we mean by representation matters. That is not what we mean by that. When we say representation matters, it's representation with awareness, representation with inclusivity. For instance, is there going to be any job that I have, am I going to be called because I'm Black a DEI hire? Am I just going to be called a DEI hire? When do I not get to be a DEI hire? When do I get to be a person qualified for this job? When do I get to do that? When is my education going to matter? When is my background going to matter? When is my skin color going to stop shouting as loud? It's going to stop shouting louder than my education, louder than my work experience, louder than my bank account. When is that going to happen? Because when they see us, they see my skin color. So it's okay to, as former President Johnson said, it's okay to sell somebody who thinks that I'm taking something from them. So it doesn't matter if I'm that doctor in that surgical room. I took that Black doctor in that surgical room. I was a DEI hire over someone white that didn't get that job.
Let's dive into, because
when does that stop being? When do I stop being a DEI hire? That's the default to. That's the new race card. DEI hire.
It really is, and I think of the particular rhetoric that we're navigating now, and we cannot talk about the rhetoric of this election without talking about two documents that are circulating now, that are very much at the forefront of the conversation. The first is Project 2025. We definitely need to talk about that. The one that I think is being under discussed and not really brought to the forefront as much is Agenda 47, which is President Trump's direct statement of his policy and his platform that he's running on behalf of the Republican Party. That is basically Project 2025 light. Project 2025 is about 900 pages. Agenda 47 is about, I want to say, 30 to 40 pages of very short statements of what the Republican Party is planning to do and what their agenda is and what their stance is. But one thing that stands out to me a lot in Project 40 or Agenda 47 that is not as prevalent in Project 2025 is the use of that sort of language. He says directly in Agenda 47 that we're going to root out CRT and education based on race. We're going to fire woke professionals. We're going to root out the woke agendas. We're going to disband these things that are falling into that sort of rhetorical line. I was trying to count today as I reread Agenda 47 how many times the phrase woke was used, and it's numerous. It's probably on every other page at least once or twice per page. So let's dive into Project 2025 and just talk about what the implications of that sort of political agenda, political platform, and political posturing is for an election like this. What does it mean if we adopt a Project 2025?
Can I just again with the history? Bum, bum, bum. Can I just say that we have seen a Project 2025 before in this country? It was called the Southern Strategy, right? So maybe not as in depth, maybe not 900 pages, but this is a concerted effort to seize power in the federal government, to seize control of courts and legislative bodies, and to essentially not make America progress, or live up to its foundational documents. So while I understand the urgency behind us understanding what Project 2025 is, the first thing I want to do is say there is nothing new under the sun. We've seen it before. It was just called the Southern Strategy at that time. And probably not as intense, but we have definitely seen these moves before. We also saw one, I cannot remember it, but it was right after Reconstruction, where they were basically, or this is what helps to dismantle Reconstruction, but they basically retold the story of the Civil War, what that was about, and how we need to really attend to the ideals that the Civil War was not about, for the South, it wasn't about keeping enslavement going. Rather, it was about history, and it was really the enslaved Blacks in the Northern Union who actually came in to divide a Southern way of living. And this rhetoric behind reinstitutionalizing, to like reconquer, to turn back towards normality, the ways that we have grown up and the ways that we have known, we have seen this before, y'all. So to that end, I just want to start, before we start this conversation, I want to say Dog Whistle Politics, The Southern Strategy, this other book that I'm going to get the name of while we're discussing this, all of these things are an attempt to keep the status quo as the status quo, to maintain systems of power. And to that end, because we understand we have seen this play before, it becomes even more important to not only be informed, but to be digitally literate, to have some form of literacy about whether it's historical, whether it is the history of your communities and the impact of politics on those communities. It is so important for us to at least pick up a book, or whatever mechanism that you're going to use to educate yourself and to learn about how these same strategies have been used in the past before. Now, as we are looking at today in the present era and what those strategies mean, it also is important for us to understand that this is a power grab. This is an absolute power grab. And I would also, y'all remember when Stacey Abrams was walking soles off of her shoes in Georgia to flip the state of Georgia? One of the things that was very dangerous about that action is that she was going door to door to educate people one at a time about what the campaign meant for them, what their vote meant for them, and how that vote could not only help them individually, but help their communities. So Project 2025 comes in and we're like, oh my God, the world's falling apart. It's not falling apart. For us, while it is a document that is filled with ridiculousness, it's also a wake-up call to other communities to be like, hey, y'all need to know what's going on in your communities. You really need to understand how this project will impact you. But more so than that, understand the history of how things like this have occurred and the power grabs that happen because of projects like this. So I hope I haven't been on a history soapbox for too long, but it is so important for us to understand those things and how it impacts our now. What does a power grab mean for my community? And will my community be served in that power grab? And if you're wondering oh, well, I have nothing to worry about because I belong to the majority culture in this country. I don't think anybody is actually saying that, but if they are, the thing is Project 2025 doesn't just help marginalized and historically excluded populations. It hurts all of us. We just don't see it yet. But then white supremacy also hurts all of us. We just don't recognize it until it is upon us.
Agenda 47 scares me in the education realm because what it's going to do is it's going to leave lower socioeconomic communities behind. And this is it doesn't matter the race. It's going to leave rural communities behind. It's going to leave inner city schools behind, and middle class school districts are going to be left behind in this as well. So it's couched under school choice, but we all know that private schools still get to choose who comes to those private schools. So it's not just about, well, you can go across, even if you had transportation. It's not just that I have transportation to drive my kids over to this private school from this zip code that's been forgotten by the city. That private school has the opportunity to gatekeep on those students. So it's not really school choice. It's not really school choice. So then what happens to those schools when you start cutting funds from those public schools? Then what happens? And so that's going to be detrimental. And then you have someone who can make changes to a structure, a public education structure where people are desperate and don't have time to read up on what's really going on because I'm trying to pay my bills, or I'm trying to keep food on the table, or what have you. So things are just happening to them. And that was a smart move to say, okay, let's let these things happen to these individuals. They're working so hard, they don't have time to really understand what's really going on. But then when we enact it, what is going to be the fallout? How did we know the school choice was going to leave these communities destitute? Why didn't anybody tell me? So, I think it's important to educate people on what Agenda 47 would do so that they would go out and register to vote, so that they would vote the way in which we all can prosper, because it's about quality of life. I feel like in America, it's about a quality of life. So your zip code shouldn't determine how you fare in life. It should not. You should have the same quality of life, the same access with different talents. You should have the same access to education, to healthcare, to housing, to clean streets, to safe water, to all of those things. But Agenda 47, no, we're going to really create an even wider divide among classes. We're gonna create a wider divide. We're gonna create that divide in health. We're gonna create that divide in foreign affairs. We're gonna create that divide in education. We're gonna create that divide by giving me the power to do these things, the sole power to be able to do these things. It's just not fair. And I'm always looking for this whole how do we achieve quality of life for all. So I shouldn't have to move into an upper middle class or capitalist class to have good health, to have access to a good education. I shouldn't have to do that. But that's what 47. Let's bring prayer back in schools. Well, see, I'm a Christian. I'm a preacher's daughter. You talk about bringing prayer back in schools. If Christians are still in school, prayer should be in school. That's that's my thing. Who took private school? Do you have to wear the T-shirt to be able to do that? Do you have to pray out loud to be able to do that? We come from many faiths in this community, in our United States, our great United States. We come from many faiths. So how do we separate church and state? And we must remember, if we bring back that whole 1776, well, let's think about what was going on in 1776. Let's think about what was happening in 1776. So you want to bring back what is it? Uh, what is it that he's talking about bringing back? I can't even. And I need to read up on this. It's something 1776. Okay, the 1776 Commission. That's it.
Yeah.
That's if we're gonna bring that back. Think about what was happening in 1776. Women. Think about what was happening. If you don't want to go back and think about slavery, women think about what was happening in 1776. So, and if we don't want to go that far back, white ethnic groups. Let's think about what was happening in 1776. Let's talk about.
Curtis,
Hmm?
can you specify that in 1776, white ethnic groups meant if you were not codified as American, then you were an outsider. If you were poor white, then you were not included. We are talking about the upper echelon landowners, merchants, religious leaders. These are the only whites that were heard in 1776. I just wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up because that's exactly what I mean. That's exactly right. There was a class system among whites. There was a class system in 1776 among whites. And so we're going back to this whole idea of the fittest in society should be the ones ruling. But what do we mean when we define the fittest in society? How are we defining that? But if we go back to that ruling class ideology of 1776, that's detrimental to our whole nation.
I want to come back to one of the things you said about particularly leaning into some of the religious conversations that are part of both of these plans. But first, I want to take a moment to welcome Sister Kiana Dickinson, who has joined us. When we started the conversation, we introduced ourselves with our Black jobs. And I'd like to let you introduce yourself to the audience, share what your Black job is, and let us know your thoughts on Project 2025, if you would.
Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. It is my joy and pleasure to join this sisterhood and to be at this table, the table that we crafted, that we nurtured, that we have fed, that we have hydrated, that we have moisturized. I appreciate this table more so than many tables that I get to be a part of. So thank you for having me. And thank you for holding space as well. My Black job is the political director for the National Organization of Women, who is the oldest women's organization in the country, founded by many women that we all know, including Dr. Polly Murray, including Shirley Chisholm, including Betty Friedan, including many others. There were 20 plus women that founded that organization. And I get to serve, and it's an honor to serve as their national political director. So that is my Black job. 2025, Project 2025. My thoughts. My thoughts are that this is an attempt to pander to people that are afraid of those of us who have jobs, who are afraid of us who have worked hard to sustain a living with these jobs. It is what happens when people view our country as a pie, when they view those of us who have achieved things as taking something from them and not also having part of something that belongs to all of us, we all have rights and entitlement to. It is what happens when communities utilize their privilege to create space for themselves and don't envision a world that people would utilize their strength and their might and their courage to find space in that world for themselves. And it is a fear that people have that if they can get it and I don't have it, then that means there's something that they're taking from me. The audacity to believe that the contract that was written in the Constitution only applied to certain people in 2024 or 2025. The bill is due, as many people have said. They wrote a debt. There was a debt of what was owed to all Americans, and that bill is due. And we are seeing that we are collecting on what is due to us, what has been kept from us from since my sister said 1776. Since then, they have kept what was owed to us from us, all marginalized communities, all communities that are suffering under oppression of any kind at all whatsoever. We are all owed to us what was promised in those founding documents. And the bill is due. And we are not requesting or in collections anymore. We are just assuming and affixing ourselves to where we belong. So this is their attempt to take back what was already owed to us, which was promised to us, which is the same thing that was promised to them. So I feel like there are absolutely people who are fearful. There are absolutely people that are fearful of having, us in the White House in any way, shape, or form, and us in all the Black spaces that we occupy, us in leading communities while raising families, while suffering under oppression, and still being able to do that with some sort of joy seems to bother people a great deal. However, we continue to be unbothered and we continue to do the things and the work that we are choosing to do. I will say that I don't think Project 2025 is going to work. I think we are at a point in the country where people are seeing propaganda for propaganda's sake, and they're seeing it. I think we are at a point where we might be able to deflect from the issues of the day, but we have one job right now. All people in the country are exhausted of the country as it exists right now. All of us are tired. I don't care if it's Black, white, Native, Latino, all of us are exhausted. And we understand that there's a large portion of this country that didn't do it, and we're not responsible for fixing it. So the people that are responsible for fixing this are now, we are seeing in a historic way, showing up and identifying themselves, self-identifying, as with white dudes for Harris, with white women for Harris, with cat ladies for Harris. People are identifying, self-identifying themselves. What strikes me about that is this. We know in 2016, we had a silent meeting, I call it, and we all decided that we were voting for democracy, that there was no way that we were going to allow this person who was very clear about what they were going to do with this country to be in that space. At that time, we had the most qualified woman to ever run for office, running for the presidency at that time. We all showed up. Black women did what we do. We put the country on our shoulders and we showed up at the polls and we did what we needed to do. Almost 98% of all Black women did that. About 90% of all Black men did that. Large numbers, I don't know the numbers for everyone, but large numbers of all marginalized communities showed up, and the community that did not show up was white women. So I will say that once again, the bill is due. We did not break it. We were in formation. We did what we needed to do. We showed up. And now those individuals that didn't do that, it is now their turn, because we're always going to do what needs to be done. But we didn't break it. We are not signing up to fix it. We are just going to be consistent in our efforts for our own freedom, because when we vote, when we are free, everyone else finds it as well. So I hope they take some courage from the work that Black women before any of us did, right? They've been doing that for years as the creators of the civil rights movement, as the original creators of organizing that everyone is following and using now, that came out of not only the Black church, but out of the work of Black women. So I hope they learned their lessons, that we are the model and the example for how to make change, because we invented change for everyone. That's 2025. It's their turn.
Thank you for that. And I want to circle back on some of what you just shared as we wrap. But before we get to the end of our time, I want to circle back to some of the conversation that I believe was raised by Dr. Curtis in terms of the religious conversations that are coming into focus and into play. We have been hearing a lot about, and I can never remember the name of the film. I believe it's Bad Faith, currently free on Amazon Prime, that talks about white Christian nationalism. We're seeing the rise of what's being termed the evangelical right, and almost the weaponizing of religion and of faith under the guise of protecting the nation, while disregarding some of the prime tenets of the faith that's being claimed. One of the things that stands out to me in in Agenda 47 is the statement that's made on one of the pages about protecting religious freedom, recognizing that we are a nation made up of numerous religions and we respect the faith beliefs of everyone. And so to protect those freedoms, we're going to root out anti-Christian ideologies and people. So it's this strange disparity, right, in what's being presented as openness to religion, but what we're really protecting is a particular form of Christianity. The agenda Agenda 47 talks about preserving peace, but doing it through showing of historical military strength. So weaponizing peace. It's these strange, and I know that the number one word that keeps coming up in talking about what's being presented from the Trump-Vance campaign has been weird, is what people like to bring up. But it goes beyond weird, because there's a level of frighteningness to this sort of ideology that people are buying into because of their fear. And so I'd like to take us back and just spend some time on that ideology of white Christian nationalism, the evangelical right, and what the implications are for that rising in prominence. It's not new by any means, but it has certainly never been as prominent, I would say, as it has been over this past year, probably since 2022, and just kind of on the rise, and at first silently so, and now becoming much more loudly so. So I'd like to open the floor for any thoughts on that.
So I will just start in my thoughts about this. I wanna just give one piece to this. White fear and white guilt in some settings is so dangerous. Because think about it. How did we get here? After the end of slavery, after the civil rights movement, how did we get here? After Roe v. Wade, how did Roe v. Wade get overturned? What didn't we do as a nation to continue to work towards all of these freedoms, religious freedom, gender equality, breaking the glass ceiling, which we haven't done that, but we see more women in traditionally held jobs. How did we get here? So, I have to say, white fear and guilt is dangerous. It's dangerous because we do revert back to this idea, and that's what Project 2025 and Agenda 47. To me, it's that it comes down to those two things. We know that now our minority population is rising. How are we going to fix this? The future of your children is at stake. So we revert back. This is our nation was built on Christianity. I live in Oklahoma. Our superintendent of schools is now requiring the Bible be in every classroom, and that our teachers teach the history of the Bible. That's what we're doing here. How did we get here? How did we get here? So I just want to throw that out. Those two pieces: white guilt, white fear, and those are real. Those are real. Those are two real things.
Can I just add to maybe one answer to that question is we got here by taking our eye off the ball, by being a little easily distracted by the material things that all of us of all nationalities, ethnicities have been able to acquire, that we got very, very comfortable in some spaces. And while we weren't paying attention, we didn't recognize that our achievements were becoming threats to people, that our progress was becoming a threat. And it wasn't until they had a mouthpiece that was completely comfortable with being completely honest about how most people were actually feeling, we wouldn't know it until now. They now feel comfortable because they have a mouthpiece. They have somebody in Trump that was willing to say all the things that they have been saying in their minds, in their hearts, in their homes about our achievement, about the jobs that they think that we have stolen from them. The reason they think that tactic and that line will work is because it resonates with people that think Black women are stealing their jobs. So they think that that would work then on Black people if somebody else is stealing ours. They're trying to apply the same level of fear that you spoke about to communities of color about other communities of color. We're seeing their playbook and how they did that to their own and why they're trying to do that to us. Because never was anyone concerned about their job because they thought they were secure. They were secure in their privilege. They were secure in that until they realized that we have on this call a Dr. Treya Allen and a Dr. Ramona Curtis. And those two names bring fear in people who cannot even imagine, white people specifically, having a doctor in front of their name. It's not something that they even thought about or sought to because they assumed that just their existence gave them power, authority, education over others. And now you mean to tell me that there is a Dr. Treya Allen and a Dr. Ramona Curtis, and they actually might be more well-trained and more prepared and more educated and all of those things. And they've been afraid of it. They've been fearful of it. But it was not okay to say it until you had a mouthpiece that allowed them to be able to say it. And that's how we got here. Because now they can say the things that they weren't okay with saying before. Now they can say it. And until we find a way to put them back in the boxes that they came out of, which I don't know if we can, even if we win this election, which I believe we will, I don't know if we can put the hatred back in the box. I don't know if we can put the misogyny back in the box. I don't know if we can put it back because those people are comfortable being outside.
And and the thing that gets me with the whole idea of bringing the Bible into the classroom and having teachers. So I'm a teacher, but what if I'm not of Christian faith?
Right.
And I have to teach the Bible in my classroom because that's law. I mean, have we really lost touch with freedom? Have we lost touch with the division of church and state? The Christianity is not a form of government. We got 3 branches of government, last I heard. I mean, I'm not trying to teach a civic lesson, but I don't think Christianity was one of those.
Well,
Judicial,
on I was just going to say, if Project 47 or Agenda 47 was passed, you wouldn't be teaching a civic lesson anyway, because that's one of the cuts that gets made in there as well. But yeah, all very, very true. And I'm sorry, Dr. Curtis, I think I cut you off a little bit there. So please continue.
I was just saying, we wanted to talk about this whole idea of religion, then we're not really talking about religion. We're talking about Christianity. So you've got teachers who may not be from the Christian faith, but yet they have to teach from the Bible. And that's in the state of Oklahoma right now. But in terms of bringing back, so if we're gonna bring back certain things, are we bringing back corporal punishment in schools? Are we making America great again by well, don't even get started on making America great, because that's what I would stop right there. How do we make America great? But that's that fear that, oh, if we just get back to the 10 commandments, everything is going to be fine. If we get back to that. But it almost sounds like Agenda 47, Project 2025, it almost seems like we're going to have to start policing these folks. These folks are getting carried away with freedom. To be able to, never in America would I think someone would be able to stand before an audience of women who have earned their degrees and say, I know you really wish you were at home baking cookies. I mean, that it didn't say exactly that, but said, I know you women have been fed some garbage. You women have been fed that you need this life, this college degree, when you really want to be home. You want to be home married with kids. There's nothing wrong with any woman who aspires to do that. But how do you say that? And it's okay in America after women have fought so long and hard to be able to have their place of equity. And still we're still chipping away at the glass ceiling, but what I'm saying here is, how in the world did we get here where someone can say that freely? I mean, and women aren't just outraged. Women, Republican, Democrat, Independent, you're not outraged at that. You're okay with that. Do you think that's the Christian way? So now, am I going to have earrings, adorning myself with jewelry and all of this kind of stuff? Someone able to call women cat ladies if you're not married and you don't have kids. We're women. Are you really going to vote that ticket?
Well, let's talk about the ticket and what I think I've seen as some of the national answer to that question from you, Dr. Curtis, that has happened since President Biden stepped out of the election, gave the very inspiring statement of his reason why, and passing the torch and making space for the next generation, for new leadership, and the historic endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place. And the eruption, I would call it, in support, in onboarding to her as the candidate, the historic turn for that happened with the Black Women's Call on that Sunday, the same day that the announcement was made. That evening, there was a gathering of so many Black women, it broke Zoom. To going from a call of 44,000 Black women that raised over $1.6 million in the span of, I believe, just over 3 hours, to white women responding that we are taking up that call. They convened and gathered several millions of dollars in the course of, I want to say, an hour and a half, which resulted in white men taking up the call and putting out a call for fundraising and saying, we need to join this fight. We need to be part of this. There was recently a call for rural communities for Kamala Harris. There was a call for the Black church for Kamala Harris. There is a Twitter account or an X account for Republicans for Kamala Harris. So can we just talk about what this turn has been, what it means, and how we should feel about it? Because I personally want to feel very hopeful. I feel it is a tentative hope. I have seen this country make these strides and then turn backwards, but there feels like it feels like there is something very different happening right now. And I'd like to hear what your thoughts on that are.
You know, I remember being in Chicago, leaving church, and I remember the pastor said, after the broadcast had ended, okay, you all know that Biden has like left this presidential race. You really need to get out here and vote. And then writing back to the institution I was teaching at over the summer, and everyone saying, Kamala, Vice President Kamala is going to be endorsed by Biden, or he had at that point, he had endorsed her. And the only thing that I could think of, this is the first thing that popped into my mind, is, well, let's gear up our mental well-being and health, because the attack on Black women is about to be out there and just out of control. And I think not even 12 minutes after I had that thought, then we started having discussions about whether she was really Black enough. Or remember how she had locked up 1,000 Black men, and we, because she was bitter. And then when someone actually went and did the research, we found out it wasn't thousands of Black men, it was 45. And so my fatigue, my excitement, yay, but also my fatigue around making sure that I shore up my own mental well-being and health, because we are in a ride. We will be in this ride, and I do think that she will take it, prayerfully. But we will be in a ride for 4 or 8 years about the competency of Black women. Although Black women are the first people, they're the first people that are called when crap has hit the fan. It's called the glass cliff, right? Everything else is shot to hell. And then we're like, you know what we need? We need a Black mom. We need a Black woman. We need a Black strategist. We need a Black candidate. All of these things. So I know I'm the history person here whenever I call, but I want us to remember the uphill battle that Shirley Chisholm also had to endure because she was trying to do something amazing. Now, I don't know that we are quite there yet with the antics that she had to deal with, but that is the first thing that popped up in my brain, like being like, yay. And also, hey, let's get that self-care plan in place because you are going to be exhausted. Let's limit the amount of TV that we're going to watch. Let's figure out which news channels we're going to engage in. Let's figure out who you're going to stay in contact with. That's what this feels like to me. Even with all the amazing things that are happening, it still feels like buckle up, y'all, and put your good Kevlar on because we are in for a battle that has nothing to do with the issues and all to do about Black women and their identities.
That is just really I and it's so funny that I don't feel afraid. I feel more determined to work hard in this campaign. I feel more determined. And I don't know, for some reason I'm feeling this more as a woman. There's a threat to womanhood in America. And reproductive rights. This whole idea of bringing that, when you talk about bringing the Bible back or bringing religion back, I wonder the role of women. That's that is where my thirst is, because I'm like, how did we get here? And so I'm thinking more. My gender is speaking the loudest in this election than my race. I never thought that day would come. I'm telling you, I thought if white women had it, we're gonna be okay on the gender end. But now, I'm not so sure. I want my sisters of every race to get out here. I'm calling on my sisters in every race to get out here for our rights. For our rights. And I'm trying to tell the story more. Dr. Allen, you're our history person. I'm trying to tell the story more and more when people talk about the right for women to vote in 1921. I'm now saying, I believe it was the 60s that we as African American women got the right to vote. So, exposing the truth about all of this. It was not 19 women got the right to vote. So when I say my speaking louder, it's because if things don't go right gender wise, where does that leave the Black woman? And that's what scares me when we talk about religion, when we talk about home and family, when we talk about health. When we talk about health, that's why women have got to get out. And then on the other side of that too, on the coin of religion, and I know I'm probably all over the place, but I need to hear more Black pastors speaking out on that end of what we need to be doing. And I'm not, please, I know this is recorded, African American pastors, I am not dissing you in any way, but I just want to hear your voice elevated in that, because this is white nationalism when we're talking about this whole religion thing. But I want to hear that voice of our Black pastors, male or female, what have you, to talk about how we use religion in these political times, this heated political argument about church and state. Let me hear you. I've had a couple of pastors that have written op-eds that I appreciate and find the calmness of my spirit as a woman to hear that. But yeah, I feel like I need to hear more of those voices on that end, because I'm telling you, gender wise, I'm more and more energized to get out there and fight for this ticket. And I think the more that we hear from our Black pastors, and particularly male African American male pastors on this issue of religion, the calmer I think that we will get when they put religion in perspective of how we go about our nation. Christianity, I'll say. Let me say Christianity. Can I just go ahead and say Christianity when we talk about Christianity? I wish my dad was alive, because my dad would say, you don't have to wear the t-shirt. You don't need the little fish symbol on your car. They should know you're Christian by your love. They should know you're Christian by your love. You shouldn't have to beat somebody over the head. So we have to really tell this whole story. Look, if things get bad, y'all, they're gonna get bad for us as Black women. We as Black women. If they get bad for women, they're gonna get bad for African American women and Latino women, especially Mexican American women. I guarantee you. But I'm energized. I am. I'm energized. I'm in for the fight.
Ms. Dickinson, your thoughts?
We have 90 something days. With 90 something days, I think 91 it might be, we have to do the work. We are tired. We are exhausted. We have been doing this work for a very long time. As somebody who has done frontline work in this space, we are absolutely burned out. I don't know if we have another life-changing election in us. So we have to put it all on the table right now and summon everything we have for the next 90 days to get this accomplished. And then we are going to have to rest for a day or a week, probably no more than that. And then we are going to have to deal with all the things that are going to come with having life-changing, history-making change again, which seems to happen almost every presidential cycle since President Obama. And this is a lot for us mentally, to Dr. Tria's point. It is a lot for us mentally, a lot for us to have to deal with. And we already know what will happen because we already experienced what will happen with the election and the backlash of the election from President Obama. My concern as someone that does political work is not just all the things that you both have mentioned, but it is what's going to happen in 2028, what's going to happen in 4 years after that, when the coalition that has amassed against one enemy decides to go back to our individual corners again. We have now shared tactics, we have shared information, we have shared candidates, right? And now we are pretending that we are all together behind this issue, and we are not. We all just have one goal, and I'm happy that we have one goal, which is to get rid of this menace that we have there. But we are all going to eventually go back to our corners, and we are all going to start trying to elect candidates from our individual ideologies, from our separate spaces again. We are going to get back to that again. And when we do, what is that going to look like? Because we have now changed what modern American politics is. It's been changed completely. The tactics that used to, the basic campaigning tactics that used to be there are no longer sufficient. We have lived through an entire pandemic, which has taught people to be activists from their living rooms, to not go out and knock on doors, to not be in community with like-minded people, to consume all of your electoral information from your cell phones and not from actual people. So that has all changed. And I don't know if we have integrated those changes because we have been in survival for 9 years, trying to survive what we have experienced with the menace that we have. So that's my concern, is how do we get back to a space where we are able to elect people in a way that we are catching up with the modern times, and we are understanding the dangers of what happens when ideology gets out of hand, and we are there. And they are not going to quit just if we she will win. She will hopefully get 8 years, but understand there will be a backlash, and what's going to happen, and are we going to be equipped for it when that backlash happens? And that is my concern, because we have seen the retribution that comes from change and progress. Doesn't mean we should not progress, doesn't mean we should not work towards change, but we also need to gird ourselves and be prepared for the fight that's coming in 4 years or 8 years. And what's going to happen to down ballot races? What is going to happen to Black women that decide to run for other offices, state and local offices? What is going to happen to campaign operatives that work in this space? What is going to happen to our pollsters and how we poll for things? I want to know what politics is going to look like for us after this election, after we all go back to our corners.
With that thought, I'd like to use that as sort of the final question as we wrap our time together, is not only what comes next and where are we going, but Ms. Kiana, you brought up the quote of "learn your lessons well," and I'd like to have us wrap with that question of what are the lessons that we need to be bringing into this election? What lessons do we need to have learned from those past 9 years, as you discussed? And how do we need to be looking forward to both what's coming and what comes next after this next election, after the next 4 years, after the next 8 years, then what? So let's wrap with that question, and I'll start with you, and then we'll go around the circle to Dr. Curtis and with Dr. Tria.
I think we are all going to have to get very educated very quickly on the basics of government. We have forgotten what government is. We have forgotten the difference between advocacy, activism, and actual governance. Those are 3 very different things. And we lumped them all together to where our activists have become our elected officials and our advocates are doing other things. So we have to get very clear on what government is and start using the government the way it's supposed to be used, which as a tool and a means to serve the people, not as a way to lord over the people, but to serve the people, which means we're going to have to hold people accountable for the work that they do and don't do. We're going to have to make sure that we understand how people get elected to office. We're going to have to make sure that we understand how campaigns are run. We're going to have to make sure that we understand how to research and fact check the things that our elected officials and community members and all folks are saying in these spaces. And we're going to have to get very educated very quickly, because we have allowed other people to inform us about our governments and our protections and the services rather than going to seek that information out ourselves. So as a next step, I would encourage, as a way to protect ourselves, to protect our community, to protect our future president, that we're going to have to get very, very equipped very soon on how to navigate and maneuver our government system. And I understand historically, and Dr. Tria could speak to this much better than I understand our hesitancy about even getting involved with government. We don't want to talk to those people, right? We don't want to talk to the people. We don't want to talk to the government, but our lack of knowledge about it is what is preventing us from being able to navigate it and to be able to protect ourselves with it and from it, and be able to put more of us in it so that we are there at the table and we can advise and we can counsel and we can protect ourselves and our communities. So I just encourage everyone to get as educated as possible about politics, about electoral politics, about government, about local government, and how you can navigate these things. We are all advocates and activists, and we should step into those roles and be educators on how we get there. To the question that was asked, this is part of the reason that we are where we are, because we have allowed people to be more educated about the system that governs us than we are. And we should not and cannot do that anymore. And I would also encourage as many people as possible to figure out how to run for office, get on boards, get on councils, to do those things. And so that a woman named Kamala Harris is not an anomaly, it is a regularity. And that's only going to happen when all of us kind of come off the sidelines in whatever capacity that it is and start getting in the system a little bit more. We cannot fight back from outside. We're going to have to get involved. However you are comfortable, but we do have to get involved. So that's what I would say.
I don't even know if I could add much more to that. So one of the things that I would say in all that you're saying, I really want to take the temperature of this next generation. I want to take the temperature of those 40 years old and below. What Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X. I need to know where they are in this. I'd like to see the demographics to see where we're heading as well. I'd like to see the demographics of how many of these generations are voting. I'd like to do everything with those generations because our future is at stake. It would scare me to think that the next generation really feels good about Agenda 47, really feels good about Project 2025. We've got to get that generation educated. We've got to get them voting. We've got to get them motivating their peers to vote. But I'd like to know the demographics of those generations because I'm late. I'm at the end of baby boomers, or you could say I'm on the cusp of baby boomer Gen X. But I really need to know and work with them to say, hey, this country needs you. And where are you? Where are you in this? Don't wait till you get to be my age to start really voting and getting active in politics. And I mean even at the local level, to take the temperature and do all of those things that my sister just said with this next generation of leaders and start building people to take these positions and continue on the work that we're trying to do right now with our ticket.
So I'm going to go back to history. So in 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer gives a speech at the at the Democratic convention in Atlantic City, and she gives this speech on behalf of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. This woman, who had experienced what they call a Mississippi appendectomy, went in at 12 because she was sick and was like sterilized through the removing of her uterus, was a sharecropper, and did not have a formal education, whatever that means, at the time. But this little woman and 68 members of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party show up to the DNC, and it so shakes the president that he calls a press conference to like acknowledge this random date. The date is so random, y'all. Me as the history person here, I don't even know what the date was. And the effort was to prevent her from speaking and from her message being heard. So we've heard about, you've got a clarion call to the generation. I'm not worried about Generation Z, Y, or the young people who've always carried it in this country. What I want to speak to is the person who feels like they have no power. Here, this woman who had been violently beat because she refused to stop working, or she refused to rescind her voter registration, and had been violently beat by a Black man under the direction of the jailer, who permanently walked with a limp, who was diabetic because of the food power issues going on in Mississippi, shows up to Atlanta, and the President of the United States calls a meeting to silence her voice. That is some power, y'all. And I think that even for the person who is hesitant to get in the fight because of their experience or the history behind that experience, I want to remind us that there's evidence. There's the lineage of family Blue Hamer. And I know a lot of y'all are like, well, how could she have bestowed a lineage if she was sterilized? Because there are women who are doing this work everywhere. And so in her fight to like move and challenge the status quo, and the president at the time who like called this press conference is actually blew the speech up and made what she was saying even more powerful. So to that, I'm going to say this, that even your one vote, even your one action, even your one decision to at least go and learn, if you go to your public library and say, can you tell me where I can find a resource about the government? Um, our libraries, our public libraries are the last place of education that is not gatekept by tuition or membership. You can actually go in right now and get something, get books, get lots of media at our libraries. And if you live like in like metropolis areas such as like Tempe, like there's so many other benefits. But even if you just have to sit in a public library and ask the librarians who are also skilled and adept information literacy experts and teachers, I challenge every single one of us to do that. Because if this one woman who was functionally literate, who did not come from a lot of money, could shake a nation, what can your one action do? And her one action was just to show up in Atlanta to tell the story of what is going on in Mississippi. And so I encourage everyone to tell their story. And in addition to telling their story, as we're thinking to 28 and 32 and thereafter, I also want us to remember our history as it relates to coalitions. We cannot, and we are no longer in the day and age where we can have single single narratives, single events, single issue voting. It is really going to take a Dr. Tria Allen, a Joe Smith, Josefina Gonzalez. There is no more, well, the Black community is going to do this, especially when we look at the demographics. It is really going to take us reaching across this aisle or whatever the perceived barriers are, if it's race, great, if it's socioeconomic status, for us to understand that a vote in one area that sounds good and only privileges a few, disadvantages many. And I think that this is the thing that Chairman Fred Hampton was trying to say when he was building rainbow coalitions, that the same poor materials that they put in our schools, they put in your schools. The same lack of funding for playgrounds and those things that they give to our neighborhoods, your kids are having to walk through broken bottles as well. So one, we need to be literate. And two, we need to take action on that literacy. And then three, we need to understand that we cannot do this by ourselves. And I think that is the action plan. I'm just amplifying what my sisters have said.
Well, I want to thank you all for your contributions to this conversation, for your engagement, and for your wisdom, for what we need to be doing now, what we need to be remembering from our past, and where we need to be looking when it comes to our future. These are the important conversations that we need to be having right now as we go into this election, but they're also the important conversations that we need to keep having even as this election comes to a close, as we move into the next term of our president and our government, as we look to the future for what's to come, and as we keep moving forward. Because if we're not having these conversations that are moving us forward, then we're allowing ourselves to silently be pushed backwards. So I hope anyone listening into this conversation will share it out to others in their networks. Keep having these conversations in your communities with your churches, with your social gatherings, with your local councils, with your friends and family. Keep the conversation going, because we can't afford to not be having them, and we can't afford to be silent in these times. So we thank everyone that tuned in. We are gracious and grateful for you continuing to participate in these conversations. We are exceedingly grateful to the three of you for being willing to be repeat guests and continued contributors to these conversations, because your voices are certainly so important. And we know that you could be doing other things, but you are gifting us with your time and your expertise and your wisdom and your wit. And we are eternally grateful for you doing that. So to our community, as we always say, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, go in grace.